My name is Claire Bennett, and I never thought the first battle of my career as a lawyer would be fought on the front porch of my grandparents' house. I was only 27 when it all happened. 1 week after graduation, while the ink on my diploma was still fresh, I found myself staring at my own family as they waved a stack of papers and told me to get out. Their voices carried a tone of victory, like they had finally won something they thought was owed to them. The house in question was not just a piece of property. It was a $3 million estate, a sprawling Victorian that had stood in our family for 3 generations. Its white pillars and wide porch were symbols of permanence, of history, of love. But to my parents and younger brother, it was nothing more than dollar signs. They believed they had cornered me. They thought they had the legal authority to push me out, to erase the years I had spent caring for my grandparents and protecting what mattered most to them. That morning they arrived with smug grins. My father, Charles, looked almost theatrical in a suit that barely fit, while my mother, Diane, clutched her designer handbag like it was part of the performance. My brother Adam, 7 years younger than me, had his phone ready, recording as if he was documenting their triumph. We had the deed signed into Dad's name. My mother announced her words, dripping with false sweetness. "You need to be out by Friday." For a brief moment, I felt a wave of disbelief crash over me. Was this really happening? Was I a newly minted lawyer, about to be dispossessed of the home where I had grown up? But then something sharper cut through that fog clarity. I remembered the long nights of study, the hours spent, learning exactly how to guard against this kind of betrayal. I had prepared for this moment without even realizing it. So I stood there on the porch, heart steady gaze unflinching, and let a slow smile spread across my face. "You really think I would let that happen?" I asked softly. The words seemed to hang in the air, heavier than any shout could have been. Their expressions faltered. My father's smile stiffened. My mother's eyes darted nervously, and Adam lowered his phone just slightly. For the first time, they realized this confrontation might not unfold the way they imagined. Inside, my grandparents' photographs watched from the walls. My grandfather's stern yet kind eyes in a black and white portrait, my grandmother's smile frozen in a frame from a summer long ago. They had raised me, molded me, sacrificed for me, and I had made them a promise to protect not just the house, but the legacy behind it. In that moment, standing on the porch with the sun cutting sharp lines across the steps, I felt my resolve harden. This was not just a fight over bricks and wood. It was a fight over history, over memory, over the meaning of family itself. I would not surrender. Not to them, not to greed, not to intimidation. And though I had not yet said it out loud, I already knew the truth. I had taken steps they had no idea about. Steps that would make their so-called documents worthless. This was only the beginning of the storm. Come. They stood there, still clutching their folder of so-called proof, waiting for me to break. But I would not. My name is Claire Bennett, and I was raised to fight with both intelligence and integrity. I looked straight at them, and the silence between us grew so heavy it almost pressed against my chest. Then I leaned forward slightly and said, "You really think you can throw me out of this house with forged signatures? This place is not just a house. It is the very heart of everything my grandparents built. And I will not walk away." For the first time, their confidence cracked. My mother's smile wavered. My father cleared his throat too quickly, and Adam looked down at his phone like he was suddenly unsure if recording this moment was still a good idea. I almost laughed. They had expected tears, pleading, maybe even panic. Instead, what they found was calm defiance. Inside, I could feel the echo of my grandfather's words. "Your word is your bond, Claire. Break it, and you lose something you can never buy back." That memory lit a fire in me. I had given my word to him in the last months of his life that I would protect my grandmother, protect the home, and protect the history bound within these walls. And now, with both of them gone, that promise was more sacred than ever. So I stood taller and my tone shifted. I wanted them to understand that I was not the little girl they once abandoned. This is not a debate. This is my ground. If you plan to fight me, then know you are not fighting a naive daughter. You are fighting an attorney who has been preparing for this moment her entire life. The words landed harder than I expected. My father's face darkened, and I saw a flicker of real anger in his eyes. My mother tightened her grip on her handbag like she wanted to squeeze control back into her fingers. Adam stepped back one pace as though he was suddenly aware that the scene might not be the easy victory he thought it would be. I let the silence sit again, and then I added, "Before you take another step, remember this. You are not just facing me. You are facing the law. You are facing everything I have prepared. And I promise you, you will regret underestimating me." Their mouths opened, but no words came. In that pause, I felt the tension flip. For once, I was not the one reacting, they were. And it felt like the porch itself, the boards beneath my feet, had shifted to my side. And to you listening right now, I want you to pause with me here. Stories like mine are not just about one family. They are about what happens when greed collides with love, when betrayal collides with loyalty. I share this because I know some of you watching have lived through battles like this too. Maybe not about a house, maybe not about money, but about dignity, promises, and what is rightfully yours. Before I tell you how the next confrontation unfolded, let me ask you, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. I love knowing how far these stories reach. And if you find yourself pulled into this fight the way I was, make sure you subscribe. That way you will not miss what happens when family turns into the enemy. 'Cause trust me, this story is only heating up. When they finally turned and walked off the porch that day, I knew they would be back. They believed the house was theirs by blood, that being the so-called parents gave them an automatic right to everything. What they did not know was that blood alone means nothing when loyalty and love have been missing all along. They had underestimated me once. It would be their biggest mistake. I closed the door that day with my pulse still steady, but I knew it was far from over. You see, my family had a pattern. They circled when they smelled weakness like vultures that waited until they believed the prey could not resist. And I had seen this before, years of half-hearted visits, fake hugs, and questions that always led back to one thing: money. The truth is, my grandparents raised me from the time I was 5 years old. They gave me safety when my parents chose ambition over responsibility. And in that old Victorian house, I learned what family was supposed to feel like. My grandmother baked blueberry muffins every Sunday, filling the halls with warmth. My grandfather taught me that honesty was more valuable than gold. Those mornings, waking to the scent of muffins or sitting beside him in the library, are what shaped me. But every so often, my parents would reappear, dragging my brother along. They would come around Christmas, bearing exaggerated smiles and quick embraces. They would ask about my grades, then almost immediately steer the conversation toward Grandpa's investments or Grandma's health. By the time dessert was served, the questions grew sharper. How much do you think the house is worth these days? Do they still keep money in the same bank? The affection had always been just a mask for greed. I remember one year in particular. I must have been 11. My father showed up with tears in his eyes, talking about an emergency investment opportunity. He borrowed $50,000 from my grandparents, promising to pay it back within 6 months. Of course, he never did. Later, when Grandpa asked about repayment, my father had the audacity to shout that they were rich enough not to notice the loss. And then he said something I never forgot, that they owed him because they had raised me instead of him. That memory stung like a brand. It was the moment I realized how little he saw me as his daughter, and how much he saw me as a burden. And my brother Adam, he was no different. By the time he reached his teens, he had already learned how to manipulate with fake apologies and entitled demands. Once he even stole money from my piggy bank during a visit. My grandmother had whispered, "He should stay with us, Claire," but my parents refused. He was their baby, the one they could still control. So when you ask me why I was ready to stand on that porch and call their bluff, the answer is simple. Because every moment of my childhood had trained me for it. And to you watching right now, let me pause for a second. What would you have done if your own parents tried to steal from the very people who raised you? Would you have fought back or walked away to keep the peace? Tell me in the comments. I really want to know how you would handle it. When? By the time I reached high school, I knew my grandparents were aging faster than they let on. Medical bills stacked up, property taxes strained their fixed income. I started working part-time at the library at 16, not because they asked, but because I could see the weight they carried. And it was in those years that I began to dream about studying law. Not just for myself, but for them. One day I overheard a story in our neighborhood. An elderly couple had lost everything because their own son convinced them to sign over power of attorney, then drained their accounts. I watched them walk away from their home with nothing but bitterness in their eyes. That night, I promised myself I would learn how to stop that from happening to anyone else. Looking back now, I see how every thread was weaving into a single tapestry. My grandparents' love, my parents' greed, my decision to become a lawyer. All of it was leading to this moment, the confrontation on the porch, the test of whether I could really stand my ground. And I was not about to fail them, not then, not ever. When I think about the foundation of my life, it always comes back to those early mornings in the Victorian house. My grandmother Margaret would wake me before school with the smell of warm muffins. She called me her little lawyer long before I even knew what that meant. My grandfather Thomas would pack my lunch and slip in a handwritten note that usually said something like, "Honesty is the best armor." To anyone else, they might have seemed like small gestures, but to me, they were lessons that stuck deeper than anything I read in a textbook. The house itself felt alive. Its walls carried the echoes of 3 generations. The wide porch was where Grandpa read the paper every morning, rocking slowly in his chair. The library shelves lined with leather-bound books became my sanctuary when life felt heavy. Even the creaky staircase had its rhythm, a sound that told me I was home. Every corner of that house reminded me I belonged, even when my parents' absence whispered otherwise. They never called often, and when they did show up, their visits felt staged like a performance for an audience only they could see. But my grandparents were different. They showed up every single day, no matter what. They were at every school recital, every science fair, every small victory. When I stumbled, they picked me up. When I doubted myself, they believed harder than I did. My grandmother's favorite phrase was, "A woman must stand on her own 2 feet." She said it every time I tried to lean on her too much. My grandfather's was, "Your word is your bond." Together, their wisdom braided into the rope that kept me steady through storms. But it wasn't just words. They lived those lessons. My grandfather worked 35 years at the same company, never once cutting corners. My grandmother gave piano lessons to neighborhood kids for almost 2 decades, charging less than she should have, because she believed every child deserved music. From them, I learned that real wealth had nothing to do with numbers in a bank account. It was about integrity, consistency, and the kind of love that doesn't demand repayment. I remember one summer night sitting with Grandpa by the pond in the park. I kept tangling my fishing line, getting frustrated and ready to quit. But he just chuckled, untangled it for the 5th time, and said, "Patience, Claire. Sometimes the line knots because it's supposed to slow you down." Years later, when law school exams piled up, I found myself hearing those same words. That was the beauty of their guidance. They never preached. They planted seeds, and those seeds bloomed when I needed them most. Even during my teenage years when I worked part-time at the library, I never felt like I was sacrificing. I wanted to help because I could see the strain on them, medical bills rising, taxes, the weight of maintaining an old house. They never complained. But I saw the way Grandma rubbed her temples over the bills, or how Grandpa's hands shook slightly when he carried groceries inside. It was my turn to carry some of the weight. And looking back, I see clearly now, those years of learning, helping, and watching them live with dignity built the armor I needed for the battle that came later. Without those values, I might have given in when my parents tried to corner me. Without that upbringing, I might have believed their lies. But because of my grandparents, I understood something vital. Love isn't proven by words, it's proven by actions. And family isn't determined by blood, but by loyalty. That realization was what made me strong enough to face the storm. Wow. If the house was a sanctuary built on loyalty, then my parents were the storm always threatening its walls. They came and went like traveling salespeople, arriving with smiles too wide, staying just long enough to take something, and disappearing before anyone could ask for repayment. By the time I turned 10, I had already memorized the cycle. They would show up around Christmas or Easter arms, full of cheap gifts, wrapped in bright paper voices dripping with exaggerated affection. For a day they played the role of doting parents. But by the second evening, the questions would start. "How's your retirement account looking, Dad?" my father would ask, his tone fake casual. "Still holding on to those investment properties?" My mother chimed in with practiced sympathy. "We've just had such bad luck with our last venture. If we could only borrow a little, maybe 50,000 just until things stabilize?" It was never just once. It was every visit. By the time dessert was served, the affection had vanished, replaced with urgency, with pleading sometimes, with veiled anger. And every time they left, I would see my grandmother's shoulders sag. My grandfather would polish his glasses in silence, the same way he did when he was trying not to lose his temper. My father had already filed bankruptcy twice before I turned 10. My mother jumped from one scheme to another, diet pills, timeshares, miracle cleaning supplies. Always promising the next big thing, always failing. They lived beyond their means, chasing shortcuts, instead of putting in honest work. And the saddest part was that my younger brother Adam grew up watching all of it, absorbing every tactic like second nature. He was 7 years younger than me, still a child when I realized he had already mastered manipulation. He could turn on tears in seconds, beg for forgiveness with convincing sincerity, and the next day do the same thing again. Once during a family visit, he slipped into my room and stole cash from my piggy bank. I remember Grandma's eyes, soft with pity, as she whispered, "He should stay here, Claire. He would be better off." But my parents refused. He was their golden child. Their proof they could still parent someone, even if they had failed me. I carried those memories with me into adulthood, not as scars, but as warnings. I knew exactly what my parents valued, and it was never people. It was possessions, it was money, it was opportunity at someone else's expense. That knowledge shaped my resolve. It made me sharper, more cautious, and more determined to never let them twist me into another pawn in their endless chase for wealth. And let me pause here for you, the one listening to this story. If your parents had shown up only when money was involved, if your sibling had stolen from you and called it normal, what would you have done? Would you have forgiven, or would you have built a wall like I did? Leave me a comment. I want to hear your truth, because this part of my story I know is not mine alone. The older I got, the clearer the divide became. My grandparents invested in my education, buying me books instead of trendy clothes memberships to museums instead of gadgets. They believed in building a future on knowledge. Meanwhile, my parents spent money they didn't have on cars. They couldn't afford chasing status they never achieved. And Adam, he grew into that same mindset. By his teenage years, he didn't even hide it. He bragged about what he would inherit, about how the house would someday be his. He laughed at my part-time job at the library, calling it a waste of time. But to me, that job wasn't about the paycheck. It was about lightening the load on the two people who had sacrificed everything to raise me. Every move my parents made, every scheme they failed, at every cruel remark Adam parroted from them, each one was another brick in the wall I was building. A wall between their world of greed and the one my grandparents built for me. So when they showed up years later, papers in hand trying to strip me of the very place I had sworn to protect, I wasn't surprised. Angry, yes. Heartbroken, absolutely. But surprised, never. I had always known this day would come, and I was ready. I was 16 the night I realized what I wanted to do with my life. It happened right in our neighborhood, in a small brick house only a few blocks away. An elderly couple, the Petersons, lost everything in a single stroke of betrayal. Their son, someone they trusted more than anyone, convinced them to sign over power of attorney. Within months, their savings were gone, their accounts emptied, their house foreclosed. I remember standing on the sidewalk watching them leave with boxes stacked in the back of an old sedan. Their faces were hollow, not just from the financial loss, but from something deeper, the wound of knowing it was their own blood who had done it to them. That image seared itself into my mind. I couldn't sleep for days. That was when I knew. I didn't just want to survive my own family's manipulation. I wanted to fight back for myself and for people like the Petersons. That night, I told my grandmother I want to study law. She nodded slowly, her eyes shining. "Then you must do it with both heart and backbone," she said, "because people will try to knock you down." My grandfather just smiled and added, "And remember, your word is your bond." From then on, my path was set. I poured myself into academics. While other kids asked for new phones, I asked for books. My grandparents saved for museum trips, bought me subscriptions to journals, encouraged every debate competition. They didn't see law as just a career, they saw it as armor, the kind that would protect me when my parents eventually made their move. And when law school came, I stayed close to home. Not because I lacked ambition, but because my grandparents needed me. By then, Grandpa's health was faltering, heart problems that required multiple surgeries. Grandma had started forgetting small things, where she left her keys, the name of a neighbor. I couldn't imagine leaving them behind, so I turned down scholarships to bigger schools across the country. I chose one nearby, balancing classes with medical appointments, studying at night while helping them through their hardest days. It was exhausting, yes, but it also cemented my purpose. Every lecture I attended on contracts, every paper I wrote on property law, it wasn't abstract. It was preparation. I knew my parents well enough to understand they would circle closer the weaker my grandparents became, and I was right. During my final semester, I enrolled in an elective on elder law. At first, I thought it was just practical, but it became personal almost immediately. Professor Halloran, a former prosecutor, told us something I'll never forget. 70% of financial abuse of the elderly comes not from strangers, but from family members. He paused after saying it, letting the number sink in. The betrayal cuts deeper than the loss. Those words struck me like a hammer. 70%. It explained everything I had witnessed: the Petersons losing their home, my own father borrowing $50,000 and never paying it back, the greedy questions my mother asked every Christmas. I knew my grandparents were vulnerable. I knew I was their only defense. That was when I began studying trusts, especially irrevocable ones. I learned how they could shield assets, protect elders, and ensure their wishes were carried out no matter what. The more I learned, the clearer my mission became. I wasn't just going to be a lawyer. I was going to be the lawyer who made sure my grandparents' sacrifices were never stolen. And if you're listening right now, I want to ask you something. Have you ever seen someone you love being taken advantage of? Maybe not by strangers, but by family. Tell me in the comments. I know these stories are hard to share, but your voice matters. By the time I graduated, I didn't just walk across the stage with a diploma. I carried a quiet resolve. I knew my parents would come one day with papers, smiles, and lies. I knew Adam would follow their lead, convinced entitlement was the same as inheritance. But I also knew this: I would be ready. And when I finally saw them on my porch, threatening to throw me out, I realized every long night of study, every choice to stay close, every sacrifice had been leading to that very moment. I wasn't just their daughter anymore. I was their opponent. The first real warning sign came when I borrowed my grandfather's computer to help him pay bills online. He was never comfortable with technology, so I often managed things for him. That evening, as I sorted through his email, I saw something that made my stomach clench. There it was, an email from my father to a local real estate agent. The subject line read, "Comparables in the neighborhood." Inside, he asked about the market value of homes like ours, how quickly they might sell, and whether buyers would be interested in properties over $3 million. I froze. It wasn't subtle. He wasn't just curious, he was preparing. When I showed my grandmother later that night, she twisted her wedding ring, her nervous habit, and whispered, "He borrowed 50,000 once. Promised to pay it back. When we asked, he grew angry, said we owed him. He said raising you was a debt." Her voice broke and tears slid down her cheeks. My grandfather's face grew pale as stone. He looked at me, then back at the email, and finally said, "Show me that trust information again." That was the moment I knew there was no turning back. For weeks, my father had been calling more often, his voice coated with false concern. He asked about my grandparents' health, about whether they had considered retirement communities, about the upkeep of the old house. My mother sent links to assisted living options, pretending to be thoughtful, but every suggestion was just another way of prying them out of the estate. Even Adam, usually careless, began circling. He asked me if I had ever considered what would happen after, as if my grandparents' deaths were an opportunity waiting to be cashed in. The signs piled up, and though I wished I could believe my grandparents' loyalty to their son would blind them, I knew better. Loyalty does not cancel greed. Greed always finds a way to push forward. That was when I made an appointment with Nancy Keller, an elder law attorney recommended by my professor. I sat in her office, surrounded by shelves of heavy legal texts, and laid out every detail: my father's bankruptcies, my mother's schemes, Adam's entitlement, the email about selling the house. Nancy listened, her brow furrowed, then leaned back in her chair. "Claire, your instincts are correct. There's cause for concern. An irrevocable trust could stop this cold. But your grandparents have to agree." That night over dinner, I finally found the courage to bring it up. At first, Grandpa resisted. "He is still my son," he said, his voice firm but trembling with denial. He would never go that far. Grandma said nothing, just stared down at her hands. And then I showed them the email. Silence swallowed the room. Grandma began to cry quietly. Grandpa closed his eyes, the weight of betrayal heavy on his shoulders. Finally, he opened them again and said, "Call Nancy, set it up." "Why, if you're listening to this, let me ask you something. What would you have done in my place? Would you have confronted your family or looked the other way, hoping for the best? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read them, and they remind me I'm not alone in these choices." So, that decision, the choice to trust me instead of him, shifted everything. We moved quickly, meeting Nancy and a financial advisor. The legal process was complex, with form signatures and meetings at the bank. But step by step, the Morgan Family Trust was created. The house, the investments, every major asset was transferred into its care. And from that moment, the game changed. My parents thought they were circling an easy target. They had no idea I had already built walls they could never climb. Still, I kept quiet. To outsiders, nothing looked different. The house was the same. My grandparents continued their lives as usual. But I slept better, knowing that no matter what storm came, the foundation was safe. Or so I thought. Because the storm wasn't just coming, it was already here. The day we signed the trust papers felt like stepping into a new reality. I remember walking into Nancy Keller's office with my grandparents by my side. Grandpa's steps were slow, his hand gripping the cane harder than usual. Grandma clutched her purse with trembling fingers, her eyes distant but alert when it mattered. I carried the folders of financial documents, my heart pounding with equal parts fear and relief. Nancy explained everything carefully, her tone steady but firm. "This trust," she said, "is irrevocable. That means once assets are transferred, they are shielded. No one can touch them, not even family, unless you decide otherwise." She glanced at me, then at my grandparents. "This is the strongest protection you can choose." My grandfather nodded slowly, as though signing this document meant admitting a painful truth about his son. My grandmother dabbed her eyes with a tissue, whispering, "It's for the best." When they put pen to paper, I felt the air shift. For the first time in years, I exhaled without fear. We structured it so they kept full control while alive. They would benefit from the house, the accounts, the investments, everything remained theirs. But when the time came, I would be trustee. Not because I wanted wealth, but because they trusted me to honor their legacy. That distinction mattered more to me than any dollar figure. From that moment forward, secrecy was everything. We told no one, not even close friends. To the outside world, nothing changed. My parents continued circling, calling with their fake concern, suggesting retirement communities. Adam still dropped hints about inheritance. They had no idea the doors had already been locked behind them. At night, after long hours at the small law firm where I worked, I would sit in the library with Grandpa. He read slowly now, stopping often to catch his breath, but his eyes still lit up at a good passage. Sometimes he would set the book aside and say, "You've done right, Claire. You've built a shield stronger than anything I could have imagined." Those words fueled me, because deep down I knew we had just moved from defense to offense. My parents thought they were predators circling the weak, but they didn't realize their prey had already grown teeth. And let me pause right here speaking to you who are watching this unfold. Maybe you felt that same mix of fear and determination, knowing someone close to you might betray your trust. Maybe you've wondered if you're strong enough to protect what matters. I promise you, you are. Join this community by subscribing. Share your story in the comments. Because together, we remind each other that we're not alone in these battles. Life settled into a fragile rhythm after that. I balanced work with caregiving. Doctor appointments filled our weeks. Bills piled on the desk. Grandma sometimes forgot where she left her glasses or asked the same question twice in 10 minutes. Grandpa's energy waned, though he still insisted on climbing the porch steps each morning to read the paper. But at least I slept at night. At least I knew that if the day came when my parents decided to strike, their weapons would turn to dust in their hands. Still, there was a shadow in the room none of us wanted to name. We knew time was running out. Grandpa's health was failing faster than we admitted. Grandma's memory slipped more with every season. And when the storm finally hit, it wasn't gradual. It was a lightning strike. Because 6 months later, everything changed with one diagnosis. It started with fatigue. At first, we thought it was just the strain of his heart condition, the way Grandpa seemed more tired after even the smallest task. But then the doctors ran tests, and the truth came like a hammer blow: advanced stage pancreatic cancer. The prognosis was brutal, 3 to 6 months at best. I remember sitting in the sterile hospital room as the words sank in. My grandmother wept quietly beside him, twisting her ring the way she always did when her nerves took over. I held his hand, my own chest aching, while he stared at the floor. He didn't speak for several minutes, and when he finally did, his voice was calm, but steady. "Claire, this doesn't change the promise. You have to protect her. And this house. It's more than wood and stone. It's everything we built." I tried to argue. I told him he needed to save his strength, that I would handle the future when it came. But he just squeezed my hand harder than I thought his frail body could. "Promise me," he whispered. His eyes locked onto mine, and I could see the fire of 3 generations in that gaze. "Promise me you won't let them tear it apart." I promised. Tears blurred my vision, but I promised. And in that instant, I knew this was no longer just about keeping papers in a drawer. This was a vow. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Grandpa grew weaker, moving from his chair to his bed more often, his voice thinner with each passing day. And like vultures, my parents suddenly became constant visitors. Calls every morning, drop-ins every week. Adam even took a leave from work to hang around, though most of what he did was poke through closets and drawers, as if cataloging what would soon be his. One night when I thought the house was asleep, I overheard voices in the garden. My father's tone was cold, calculating. "Once the old man is gone, we move quickly. She'll be confused. She'll sign whatever we put in front of her." My mother's voice followed, sharp and low. "What about Claire? She's always watching." My father laughed. "She's a brand new lawyer with student loans. No one will believe her over us, the actual children." I froze. The glass of water in my hand trembled, my stomach turning. I wanted to scream, to storm outside and confront them. But I didn't. I stayed quiet, recording every word in my memory. And later, I would turn that memory into evidence. Grandpa must have sensed it too, the circling, the danger closing in. One night while I sat beside him as he struggled to breathe, he reached out with surprising strength. "You'll protect her," he said again. "Protect this house. They see dollar signs, but you see love." His words burned into me. Hours later, he slipped into a coma. By morning, he was gone. We buried him in the family cemetery beneath the old oak trees he used to climb as a boy. The funeral was small, dignified, filled with neighbors who truly knew him. My parents arrived 20 minutes late, overdressed and impatient. Before they left, my father pulled me aside and asked bluntly, "When will the will be read?" His tone was so detached it felt like a stranger was speaking. Standing there with the sound of dirt hitting my grandfather's coffin still fresh in my ears, I realized how far gone they were. And I realized the storm wasn't coming, it was already inside our gates. And to you listening right now, I want you to hold on to this. Sometimes the true enemy isn't outside your family, but within it. And when that betrayal comes, the choice you make will define you. Stay with me, because in the next part, when my grandmother's mind began to unravel, the battle reached a level I could never have imagined. And the house felt impossibly quiet after Grandpa's funeral. His chair on the porch sat empty, the morning paper untouched. Grandma drifted through the halls in a fog, sometimes calling for him as though he'd simply stepped outside. I rearranged my work schedule so I could stay close, cooking meals, managing bills, and doing everything I could to anchor her. But grief has a way of widening cracks, and my family slipped right through them. 2 weeks later, on a Sunday morning, the doorbell rang. I opened it to see my parents and Adam standing there, their faces carefully arranged into masks of sympathy. My mother hugged me stiffly, whispering, "We're so sorry about your grandfather." My father clapped my shoulder with an exaggerated sigh, adding, "Family needs to stick together now." Adam gave me a quick squeeze before glancing past me into the foyer. His eyes weren't mourning, they were measuring. I let them in, offered coffee, and we sat in the living room where Grandpa used to read. The conversation began with surface-level questions. "How is Grandma holding up? Are you sleeping okay?" But before long, it shifted. My father leaned forward, voice low. "Have you gone through his papers yet? I assume there's a will that needs to be probated." I kept my expression neutral. "I'm handling everything. His affairs were in order." My mother sighed dramatically, tilting her head like she pitied me. "Claire, you must be so lonely in this big house. It's far too much for one person. A young woman like you should be living in a modern apartment closer to friends." My father nodded eagerly. "The market's at an all-time high. It would be smart to sell now while prices peak." And then Adam chimed in, twirling his phone in his hands. "Whatever comes from the estate should be divided fairly, right? Just because you lived here doesn't mean you get everything." His words dripped with entitlement, echoing every ugly lesson he had learned from them. I wanted to laugh at the transparency of it. Their condolences had barely lasted 15 minutes before dissolving into a strategy session about selling the house. They didn't see a home filled with memories with decades of love. They saw a payday. I simply replied, "I'm not making any decisions right now," and changed the subject. But the damage was done. Their greed hung in the air, undeniable. Over the next 3 days while they stayed under my roof, their true intentions surfaced even more. I caught my mother rifling through Grandma's jewelry box when she thought I was on a work call. My father walked room to room with a tape measure muttering about square footage. Adam asked Margaret, our housekeeper, if she knew about any safety deposit boxes. By the second night, I stepped onto the back porch for air, only to overhear my father on the phone. "The comps show at least 3.2 million, maybe more with updates. We just need to move quickly once we have control." Control. That was their goal, not love, not family, just control. And I want to pause here, speaking directly to you. Imagine losing someone you love, only to have family members treat their death like a business opportunity. What would you do in my shoes? Would you confront them or play along to learn their game? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every one of them, and your voices remind me that none of us face betrayal alone. By the time they left, I wasn't sad, I was resolute. They had revealed themselves completely. They were no longer shadows circling the edges. They were wolves at the door. And I knew the next time they came back, it wouldn't just be with smiles and suggestions. It would be with something far darker. So it didn't take long for them to return. Only a few weeks had passed when I saw their SUV pull up again, this time with expressions of triumph instead of sympathy. My father stepped out first, carrying a thick folder tucked under his arm like it was a weapon. My mother followed her lips, pressed into a thin line, while Adam practically bounced behind them, phone in hand, as if ready to record my defeat. They didn't bother with pleasantries. My father strode into the foyer and spread the papers across the dining room table. "We found something in our safe deposit box," he announced with a false air of authority. "An older will, signed years ago. It leaves everything to me, their only son." He tapped the papers with one finger. "And as you'll see, we also have deeds transferring the house into my name." I scanned the documents quickly. The signatures were shaky imitations. The notary stamps looked suspiciously fresh. I didn't need more than a glance to know these were forgeries. But instead of exploding with anger, I stayed calm. My silence unnerved them. "You're out by Friday," my father added smugly. "We've already spoken with a buyer." I leaned back in my chair, folded my arms, and asked softly, "You really think a forged will overrides an irrevocable trust?" My voice was so calm it caught them off guard. My mother blinked. Adam frowned. My father's smirk wavered. They recovered quickly, trying to intimidate me with volume. "This is happening whether you like it or not," my father snapped. "You've been living here rent-free, manipulating them in their old age. A judge will see right through you." I smiled faintly. "Maybe you should hire a lawyer who knows the difference between a valid document and a felony." For a moment, silence hung over the table. I could see it in their eyes, the flicker of doubt, the recognition that I wasn't the frightened daughter they remembered. I was their equal now, maybe even their superior. My mother reached across the table, her tone softening. "Claire, honey, no one wants a fight. We'll give you a fair portion, something to help you get started. But the estate is ours. That's how it was always meant to be." I almost laughed. A fair portion, as if they were being generous instead of criminal. Adam piped up, then his voice sharp. "You can't keep everything just because you lived here. Grandma and Grandpa weren't in their right minds when they made that trust. Everyone knows it." The irony of his words nearly choked me. They were the ones exploiting my grandparents' vulnerabilities. Yet here he was, accusing me of undue influence. I rose slowly, gathering their fraudulent documents into a neat pile and sliding them back across the table. "Take these and leave, and understand this: if you come back, you won't be facing just me. You'll be facing the law. Forgery and fraud carry prison sentences." My father's face turned crimson, but my words had landed. They snatched the folder, muttering threats as they stormed out. That night, I called Jake Sullivan, a colleague from my firm who specialized in fraud cases. I laid out everything: the fake will, the forged deeds, the threats. His voice was steady but grim. "If those documents are what I think they are, they've committed multiple felonies. Get me copies, if you can. And, Claire, don't face them alone." I also called Nancy Keller, the attorney who helped set up the trust. When I explained what had happened, she didn't sound surprised. "This is exactly what we feared," she said, "but the trust is solid. File an injunction immediately to block any fraudulent transfers. I'll draft it tonight." By midnight, I had a plan. Locks would be changed, cameras installed, a legal team assembled. Because this wasn't just about property anymore. This was war. See, the moment their SUV disappeared down the street, I got to work. If they thought a stack of forged papers would intimidate me, they had no idea what I was capable of. That night, I sat at the dining table surrounded by folders, laptops, and legal pads, transforming my grief into strategy. This wasn't just about protecting a house anymore. It was about protecting the truth. My first call was to Jake Sullivan, my colleague who specialized in fraud. Within an hour, he was at the house, his paralegal in tow. I laid everything out for him: the trust documents, medical records, proving my grandparents' competence when they signed even a journal I had kept documenting suspicious behavior from my family over the years. Jake studied it all with a grim expression. "Claire, this isn't just forgery. This is attempted theft on a grand scale. We'll need every scrap of evidence, but you have enough to bury them in court. My second call was to Nancy Keller. They've made their move, I told her. She didn't sound rattled. Instead, she was calm, almost reassuring. The trust is ironclad, she said. But I'll draft an emergency injunction tonight. If they try to file anything at the Registry of Deeds, the court will already be blocking them. Her confidence steadied me. From there, I turned to the house itself. By dawn, a locksmith had changed every lock. By noon, a security company was drilling in cameras covering every entrance, every vulnerable corner. Signs went up property under audio and video surveillance. My father liked to work in shadows, whispering schemes behind closed doors. Now there would be no shadows left. I also contacted the bank. The manager, who had known my grandparents for decades, was horrified at what I described. He flagged every account tied to the trust, placing alerts for any unusual activity. You don't have to worry, he promised. If they try to move so much as a dime, we'll know. By evening, I had 3 complete sets of documents prepared. One locked in my safe, one with Jake, and one with Nancy. Digital copies were encrypted and stored in multiple secure drives. No single point of failure could jeopardize the estate. That night, the phone calls started. First polite, my father suggesting we talk things through like adults. Then angrier, my mother leaving messages dripping with guilt. Finally, outright threats. You don't know who you're messing with, my father growled in the last voicemail. I'm your father, and you will respect me. That house and money are mine, and I will have them one way or another. I played the message twice, then saved it to the evidence folder. Every word was another nail in their coffin. By Thursday evening, my legal team had grown. Sophia Rodriguez, an estate litigation specialist, reviewed the trust and confirmed what I already knew. They don't have a case. A prior will doesn't override an irrevocable trust. Any competent attorney would tell them that. This is pure fraud. Her words gave me strength, but still my body buzzed with nerves. Friday was coming fast, and they had promised to return, with a moving truck, with their fake deeds, with neighbors as their audience. And here's where I'll pause, because I want you to feel the tension the way I felt it. Imagine securing every lock, installing cameras, gathering allies, knowing full well that your own blood was preparing to march up your driveway, determined to rip away what wasn't theirs. Would you have been ready to face them, or would you have folded under the pressure? Think about it, because in the next part, when they arrived with movers at their back, the confrontation turned into something unforgettable. Friday morning arrived like the calm before a storm. The sky was bright, deceptively peaceful, but inside me, adrenaline pulsed like a drumbeat. I dressed deliberately, navy suit, polished shoes, and the pearl earrings my grandmother had given me on my graduation day. She had said, "Wear these on important days, Claire." This day qualified more than any other. By 8:30, my allies were in place. Jake brought coffee and quiet confidence. Nancy arrived with the emergency injunction signed by a judge the day before. Sophia carried duplicate copies of the trust and every supporting record. Patricia, the notary, stood ready to witness anything that unfolded. And Margaret, our housekeeper, who had been more like family than my actual parents, busied herself in the kitchen, filling the air with the smell of cinnamon rolls. The house no longer felt vulnerable, it felt fortified. We decided I would face them alone at first. The porch would be the stage. The house behind me, filled with witnesses and documentation, would be my fortress. At 11:45 sharp, their SUV pulled up, followed by a rumbling moving truck. Neighbors peeked from gardens and windows. Some drifted closer, curious. My father emerged in a suit too flashy for the occasion, my mother hiding behind oversized sunglasses, Adam grinning like he was about to livestream my humiliation. 2 movers climbed down, already uneasy as they sensed the tension. "Right on time to watch you leave," my father called, waving his folder of forged documents like a trophy. My mother added sweetly, "We even brought a truck to help you pack." Their act was so transparent, I almost laughed. I rose from the porch swing and faced them. "Before you step closer, be aware this property is under surveillance. Everything you say and do is being recorded." That stopped them, if only for a moment. Then my father smirked. "You always did love the drama, Claire. None of this changes the fact we have legal documents. This house is mine. You mean those forgeries? I asked calmly. The ones you think can override an irrevocable trust signed over a year ago when both grandparents were alive and competent? My mother's smile faltered. Adam's grin dimmed. My father's jaw tightened as he stomped up the steps. Whatever you tricked them into signing, it doesn't count. They wanted me to have this house. At that moment, the door behind me opened. Jake stepped out, followed by Nancy and Sophia Patricia clutching her notary seal and Margaret standing with folded arms. My father froze mid-step. Mr. Bennett Jake said pleasantly, "I'm attorney for the Bennett Family Trust. I believe you were just about to accuse your daughter of fraud. Please continue, we're recording for the court." The color drained from my father's face. He sputtered but didn't speak. My mother grabbed his arm, whispering urgently. The movers shifted awkwardly, clearly regretting their job assignment. Sophia stepped forward smoothly. "We hold a court injunction preventing any property transfers. Presenting forged documents to a registry or bank is a felony punishable by prison time. You may want to reconsider." For a long moment, no one moved. Then my father tried one last angle. "This isn't over. I'll fight to the Supreme Court if I have to. I'll ruin her reputation." Jake didn't even flinch. "Threatening frivolous lawsuits and defamation will add harassment to the record." I decided it was time for the final blow. I pulled out my phone and played the recording of their late-night garden conversation. Their voices rang out clearly, plotting to exploit my grandmother's confusion and cut me out completely. Gasps rippled from the neighbors. My mother covered her mouth. Adam lowered his phone, shame flickering across his face. My father went purple with rage. "That's illegal. You can't record." Actually, Nancy interrupted. Massachusetts law allows it when a party to the conversation consents. Claire consented to her own recording, perfectly legal. By then, the police had arrived, summoned by concerned neighbors. Officers stepped onto the lawn as my parents stumbled backward. My father muttered, "This isn't how family should treat each other." "You're right," I said softly. "Family doesn't exploit. Family doesn't steal. This is not family." Defeated, they retreated to their SUV. The movers drove off empty. Neighbors whispered, watching as the spectacle ended, not with my eviction, but with their humiliation. I stood tall on the porch, my allies around me, the trust papers secure in my hand. For the first time, I felt the weight lift. The house was safe, the legacy was safe, and I had kept my promise. The sound of their SUV's engine faded down the block, but the silence it left behind was deafening. Neighbors lingered at the edge of their lawns, whispering, their eyes darting from me to the now empty street. Some looked shocked, others almost relieved. Everyone in that neighborhood had seen my grandparents' kindness for decades, and now they had seen the truth about my parents laid bare. The officers remained a few minutes longer, jotting notes as Jake and Nancy explained the trust, the injunction, and the attempted fraud. One officer shook his head. "I've seen some messy estate disputes," he muttered, "but never anything this brazen." His words carved the reality deeper into me. This wasn't just a family squabble. This was crime. When the police left the house, filled with an almost sacred quiet, Margaret pressed a warm cinnamon roll into my hand, her own eyes misty. "They would be so proud of you, Claire," she said. For the first time that day, I let myself cry, not from fear, but from relief. But the relief was complicated. Standing there, surrounded by the people who had stood with me, my legal team, my neighbor peeking from across the street, I realized I felt no victory, just sadness. Because what had happened on that porch was more than the collapse of a scheme. It was the final collapse of the idea that my parents might one day change. Over the next week, the fallout spread quickly. Neighbors who had once believed my parents' excuses now avoided them. Adam's social media, where he had tried to smear me with accusations of manipulation, filled with comments defending me. People wrote about seeing the moving truck, about hearing the recording about the police arriving. Their narrative had shattered under the weight of reality. My father tried calling his messages, swinging between rage and desperation. "This isn't over. You've disgraced us," one said. Hours later, another message arrived, full of pleading. "You don't understand, Claire. We needed this. Help us." I saved every word, every voicemail as evidence, but I never answered. My mother attempted one last performance. She showed up at my law office unannounced, dressed in black as though mourning a tragedy, begging for a private talk. Security escorted her out. My colleagues who had witnessed the scene rallied around me even more. Jake clapped my shoulder afterward and said, "You held your ground and you did it with more dignity than they'll ever have." Adam was the only one who didn't try again. After lowering his phone on the porch that day, shame had finally cracked through the bravado. He vanished from the fight, leaving my parents to scramble alone. Through it all, the trust remained untouched. Every lock on the house was secure, every account flagged. The Morgan estate stood exactly as my grandparents had intended, safe, preserved beyond the reach of greed. So, to you listening now, I want to ask something. If you stood on that porch facing your own parents as they tried to rob you of everything you had promised to protect, would you have fought back, or would you have given in to keep peace? There's no easy answer. Tell me in the comments, because your perspective matters. And maybe, just maybe, it will help someone else preparing for their own battle. When the dust settled, I walked through the house in silence. Every room echoed with memory. My grandfather's chair by the fireplace, my grandmother's recipe cards still in the kitchen drawer. This house wasn't a prize to be divided. It was a story, a legacy, a living reminder of two people who gave me everything. And I had kept my promise. The war wasn't just won in legal documents or court injunctions. It was won in the choice to stand firm, to hold the line, even when it meant turning against the very people who were supposed to love me. And though the victory was bittersweet, one truth had never been clearer. Family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by loyalty, love, and the courage to protect both when they're under attack. After the confrontation, life didn't return to normal, it created a new normal. The house felt different, quieter, but not empty. For weeks, I walked its halls, pausing in rooms that still carried the scent of my grandparents. The library where Grandpa had read in his leather chair, the kitchen where Grandma's laughter used to echo. At first, those memories hurt, but slowly they began to feel like strength instead of sorrow. I realized then that keeping the house wasn't enough. My grandparents' legacy couldn't just sit inside four walls. It had to move forward to touch lives the way they had touched mine. That's when I created the Harold and Margaret Bennett Scholarship Fund at my law school. Using part of the trust, I set it up for students who wanted to specialize in elder law future lawyers, who would stand guard against the very kind of exploitation my parents had attempted. The first time I awarded the scholarship, I felt something shift. My grandparents' generosity hadn't ended with them. It was alive, rippling outward. At the same time, my own career transformed. I shifted my practice exclusively to elder law and estate planning. Every time I sat across from an elderly couple worried about predatory relatives, I thought of my grandparents. Every trust I built, every asset I helped protect, felt like a quiet victory, not just for my clients, but for the promise I made. It was no longer just my story. It became my mission. And I didn't do it alone. Jake and Sophia became more than colleagues, they became family. Margaret still visited weekly, bringing baked goods and motherly advice. My neighbors who had witnessed the porch confrontation invited me to block parties and community dinners. Slowly, I built a chosen family, bound not by blood, but by loyalty and care. Then one afternoon, 2 years later, a small envelope arrived with no return address. Inside was a note in Adam's handwriting. "I'm sorry. They were wrong. I was wrong. I miss you. No requests for money, no demands, just regret." I sat with that note for a long time, my hands trembling. After much thought, I wrote back, "Thank you. That matters." I didn't invite further contact, but I left the door slightly open. Maybe healing could begin even if reconciliation never did. My parents, though, never changed. They vanished from my life entirely, leaving behind only voicemails full of threats or pleas I no longer listened to. Letting go of them wasn't easy. It was like grieving people who were still alive. But in that release, I found freedom. Because the truth is, family isn't guaranteed by blood. My grandparents showed me that real family is built on love, sacrifice, and honesty. And when that bond is broken, you're allowed to build a new one with those who truly care. To everyone watching this, I want to leave you with this. Protecting yourself against exploitation, even when it comes from family, is not selfish. It is courageous. If this story resonated with you, subscribe and stay with us. Because next, I'll share another case where family betrayal nearly destroyed everything and how it was turned into strength. You won't want to miss it. So, today I still sit on the porch swing at sunset. The garden Grandma planted blooms every spring, the roses climbing the trellis the way they always did. I close my eyes and hear her laugh, Grandpa's steady voice, and I know I've kept my word. Their legacy isn't just in the house or the trust, it's in the choices I make every day. And maybe that's the greatest inheritance of all. When the storm finally passed, I learned something I never expected. Grief doesn't vanish when the fight is over. It lingers, reshaping itself into silence, into memories that echo in every corner of the house. For months, I would still catch myself turning to share something with Grandpa, or waiting for Grandma's laugh in the kitchen. The absence was sharp, but slowly that absence transformed into presence. I began to feel them not as shadows of loss, but as steady guides reminding me why I chose to fight. I also discovered that healing doesn't come all at once. It comes in layers: the quiet of a morning where the air feels lighter, the smile of a neighbor who remembers your grandparents fondly the first time you laugh without guilt. Healing is not forgetting, it is carrying forward. The house no longer feels like a battleground, it feels like a foundation. The library where Grandpa read is now my study, filled with case files of families I've helped protect. The kitchen where Grandma baked is still alive with the smell of cinnamon and coffee, though now it's me doing the cooking. Every room holds their spirit, but also my own. Most of all, I've learned that love and loyalty are not automatic. They are choices. My parents chose greed, I chose to protect, and that choice gave me freedom. So if you're facing your own storm, I'll leave you with this. You are stronger than you think. Protecting yourself, standing firm, saying no to betrayal. These are acts of love, not selfishness. Love for the people who raised you, love for the truth, and love for yourself. Because in the end, the greatest legacy we can leave is not money or property. It is courage, integrity, and the quiet strength to honor those who showed us what family truly means.